Thank you, Mr. Waltz.
Hey,
Now
Chairman.
recognize Mr. Langevin for 5 minutes.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Very good. Thank you. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Thank you for your service. Let me begin with this, and this is for both of our witnesses. So I've been told that there is a chronic overuse of the surface force, causing fatigue, low morale, and safety concerns. I know we touched on this a bit already this morning. So the question is the Navy fleet leadership empowered to relay concerns of fatigue and overwork when a mission is requested, especially a non-essential mission? And does the current culture allow fleet leadership to communicate these concerns?
Yes, sir. So those, I alluded to it in an earlier answer, very direct opportunity for the Chief of Naval Operations to influence requests for forces above the baseline plan for the year. Obviously, the world gets a vote, and it's a risk decision, but with the Navy having a very strong voice, one element of that I would highlight, if you look at, for example, steaming days in FY20, the Navy executed well above the plan. In FY21 last year, the decrease in the annual steaming days was about 7,000 to 22,000, so a non-trivial, substantial decrease, reflecting the Navy voice that the force was being oversubscribed. Nonetheless, the concern remains. It's real. The tension is real between the need for combatant commanders and the ability to deliver ready, lethal, properly trained and equipped naval forces. One other thing I would highlight very quickly before turning it over to Admiral Kitchener, besides that demand lever, some of the other actions I talked about were very focused on to pull on this fatigue issue within the way a unit is manned today, to pull workload off the sailor. Clearly, I'd mentioned condition-based maintenance and using AI. In aviation, we did a maintenance program reset that took 30% of the scheduled maintenance out of a VFA squadron by giving a homework assignment to NavAir Syscom to go back and look at the totality of maintenance requirements that have been added over the life of the Hornet. And we learned that they had all been added and never pulled out. We reduced scheduled maintenance by 30%. I directed Naval Sea Systems Command to do the same homework assignment for our ships. And so, again, looking to see if we can, in terms of the 67-hour designed work week for our sailors when deployed, to pull off unnecessary, unvalue-added work. The last item I would highlight in there, there's also the opportunity to adjust mission. So OpNav N9 has a homework assignment right now to look at the required operational capabilities, the mission assignments, which drives the manning requirements for all our surface ships. And an example of an actual case, cruiser that based on where it was ordered, did not have the need to do a maritime interdiction operation, visit board, search and seizure, and pull that workload off the sailors. All elements of us thinking, how do you both pull work off as well as bring an additional supply on? Roy, your thoughts?
When will they be reporting back to you, Admiral, on those requests that you've made and those changes? Do you have a time certain as to when they'll be reporting back to you?
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't catch the question.
Is there a time certain when they will be reporting back to you on those findings, the things that you've laid out as in terms of changes?
I believe you're asking about the homework assignment to NAVC to report on the ability analytically, not just to remove, but analytically to remove maintenance requirements. Is that the question?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't have a solid estimate for that, but I'm happy to close the loop for you when I get that.
Okay. Thank you. Admiral Kitchener?
I'll speak at a very kind of strategic level here, sir, but I think to answer your question, we do a very good job, in my opinion, between myself and the numbered fleet commander on ensuring that ships are manned, trained, and certified for the mission. I can give you examples of cases where we needed to accomplish the maintenance, or if a training entitlement wasn't completed, where we delayed a ship from proceeding on to the next phase of its maintenance. The one I would tell you that is most recent to me is it's a group that just came back, the Essex ARG, They were going out and they needed to go to the Middle East to support operations there. And we had to do some critical repairs to the ship. And I said, hey, this is what we need to do. It took us a little bit longer than we thought. We delayed the deployment. We still got there on time and executed the mission, but we made sure they were ready for it. We do the same thing with training. So we don't put sailors in positions or ships in positions where they're not ready to execute the mission. I think that works very well. If I don't agree on it with the numbered fleet commander or there's a disagreement with us, then we go to the 4-star fleet commander and it's adjudicated at that level. It's a robust C2. It came out of the McCain Fitz.
Thank you, Admiral Kitchener. Well, and thank you. We got the gist, I think, of the answer, so that was good. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Langevin. Next up is Mr. Scott.
Thank you. And Admirals, Mr. Wilson and Chairman Courtney both alluded to the Black Sea area, and you certainly timely, maybe not for the specific subject matter, but very timely. And while you discussed the capabilities that we have in the Black Sea region, it's my understanding that we do not have a strategy for the Black Sea region. Is that correct?
Maybe you could amplify more. I don't understand.
My understanding is that NATO nor the U.S. has developed a strategy for the Black Sea region.
I'm unaware of a specific Navy strategy for the Black Sea.
Mm-hmm. So I have kind of a suggestion, Mr. Courtney, and this is not a suggestion for our admirals, but for the people that are watching around the world. I think that the UN should declare a no-go zone in the Black Sea for Russian warships and for the skies above the Ukraine. And I think that the UN should ask the world to enforce those no-go zones. The Ukrainian people and President Zelensky have done a tremendous job putting up a fight against superior forces. I have very serious reservations of whether or not they can hold on if the Russians are hitting them from the air, the land, and the sea. The world has an obligation, and perhaps it is the UN that should propose the no-go zones and have that vote, and that the world needs to be prepared to enforce those. With that said, how much coordination is there with our NATO allies with regard to procurement, maintenance, material conditioning, and training? Our NATO allies now recognize, including Germany, that they're going to have to spend 2%. How much coordination is there with the purchase of the ships and the weapons and the training that we need to defend the world from people like Vladimir Putin?
I'm thinking of specific examples that might come to mind there. And I don't have a lot of detail at my fingertips, so I'm happy to take that for the record as well. The foreign military sales program, nonetheless, of the U.S. is robust globally. And my side picture is at a very strong level. So without being able to provide specific elements of our NATO allies today, I would offer that as a baseline context and then offer to get back to you with more detail.
I suppose my point for the committee and for the admirals is that it's a whole lot cheaper to buy the second than it is to develop the first of a weapon system. And it seems to me that perhaps coordination among NATO countries might get us all more of the weapons and the equipment that we need for a lot less money. And so if we're going to buy two, and the Brits are going to buy two, and the Germans are going to buy two, then purchasing 6 at one time would give the U.S. and our NATO allies in the world a better deal on what it takes to secure the world from people like Vladimir Putin. What are the crews being trained on today with regard to the combat at sea, potential combat at sea? What specific areas are you training the most for?
Sir, we train them at integrated air and missile defense, against not only ballistic missile defense threats, but also against air-launched and surface-launched and sub-launched cruise missiles. We actually share a facility with the Nautic team on my air colleagues up in Fallon, Nevada, where we integrate our destroyers and our cruiser crews in with pilots sitting in tubs, and then we network out to the air wing on the Fallon range. So that's pretty sophisticated. Our WIDIs at the Surface Mine and Warfare Development Center have been working extensively on a SAG tactics, how to defeat high-end Chinese surface ships so we can take those down and allow our other precision fires to interdict. And then, of course, anti-submarine warfare, which we continue to get better and better at as we get more and more practice.
If I could ask one quick question, Admiral, do you feel like you have enough weapons in your wartime reserve right now?
In our wartime reserve, we have enough weapons going out on our deployed ships, sir, and we're ready to take the fight there.
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Chair now recognizes Mr. Golden.
Thank you. Last year, we had some testimony to the subcommittee about conventional prompt strike. And I've seen some reports recently that the timeline might have slipped on deploying that on the Zumwalt away from FY25. I was just curious for any kind of update you can provide.
Thanks for that question. My sideline is that conventional prompt strike on the Zumwalt is still targeting the FY25 timeframe, and on Virginia Block 5, FY28. I would put an immense caveat to that, however, which is we need your partnership to enact the funding to do that. If this CR continues this year, those timelines will absolutely slide.
Thank you. That's helpful. We've had a lot of supportive testimony from the Navy over the last couple of years about follow-on multi-year procurement related to the DDG Flight 3. Of course, the subcommittee included a provision to tell the Navy to go ahead and do that, give it the authority to do that last year. We didn't land there with the Senate, but there was a reporting requirement to the Navy to get back to Congress about the value of a follow-on multi-year procurement financially, et cetera. Do you know anything about the status of that get back and when we might be able to expect something back from the Navy?
I'm not familiar with the status, but we will get that back to you.
Yeah, if we could get that back for the record, I appreciate it very much. Thank you. That's it. Thanks.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Gallagher.
I keep getting demoted on this committee, by the way. I have to wait longer. But in response to Representative Wilson's questions, Admiral Lescher, about Ukraine working with Turkey, you said, quote, what it does highlight in a positive sense, from a strategic perspective, we're focused on integrated deterrence that you see being done very incredibly well. I'm intrigued by this concept of integrated deterrence. I am eagerly awaiting the publication of the National Security Strategy and then the National Defense Strategy, and assume integrated deterrence will be the cornerstone of it. But in this context and in light of your comments, two questions about integrated deterrence. What do you see being integrated into deterrence that wasn't there before?
So the concept, as I was highlighting it, is integrated across all domains. So you see an increased focus in the joint warfighting concept, multi-domain, integrating the domains, which is not to say they weren't before. It's an evolution, for sure. And then the broader, again, evolution to focus and deliver as part of a joint force, as part of whole of government, and working in particular with allies and partners, all an evolution and an emphasis, I think, that you're familiar with.
But if we're doing integrated deterrence very incredibly well in Ukraine, it raises a second question, which is, what did we deter?
Excellent question, I suppose. So we're deterring any expansion into the NATO territories that we're committed to defend.
But in a very real sense, I think, would it be fair to say deterrence, we failed to deter Putin from invading, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
So there was a deterrence failure. I don't mean this to score a cheap point. I just think that's interesting. That's something we should study. We should understand why it happened. My own view, and this gets to integrated deterrence and part of why I'm skeptical of the concept, is that if it is used to suggest that we can rely on non-military tools, specifically sanctions, or hashtag diplomacy in order to deter, uncoupled from a credible military threat, then we'll have further deterrence failures. My bias is that you have to put hard power in the path of people like Putin or Xi Jinping in order to have a hope of deterrence. I would go further and say this is the first test, real-world test of integrated deterrence, and it failed. We need to learn from that, right? I want to deter. We all want to deter. We don't want to deal with an incursion into NATO. We certainly don't want to deal with a conflict over Taiwan. But if integrated deterrence is a smokescreen for cutting our investments in hard power and somehow believing that untested technology, which won't be fielded until the end of the decade or the next decade, or allies, or statements coming out of Davos or the UN can substitute for hard power, I think we're going to see further deterrence failures. Now, I understand there are many in the building who disagree with me, and I'm open to the counter-argument, but it is a matter of fact that deterrence failed in this case. I welcome the stiffening of the Europeans' position, the shift that I perceive in Germany, the unification of the West. These are great developments that we should build upon, but deterrence still failed. And so I would argue perhaps we didn't do integrated deterrence, whatever that means, very incredibly well. And I think it would help. Usually I actually ask questions. I don't do speeches like this, but you've touched a nerve for me. One way I think the best lesson I think we can learn from this is actually in a different theater. It is in Indo-PACOM. I think the lesson is we need to think about how we armed Taiwan yesterday, right? Yep. After things start going boom, it's going to be hard to surge support, and we are engaged in a process of trying to deter the PLA by denial, and the threat of sanctions and the threat of a sternly worded mean tweet from the State Department press secretary is not going to deter Xi Jinping. I yield my remaining second.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Actually, just one response, which again, I think you raised really excellent question there, but there is examples of integrated deterrence that is happening out there, particularly in the ASW domain, where our allies are very integrated in terms of the U.S. Navy as far as dealing with that specific threat. And I don't know if you want to just maybe.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to amplify. It's almost a straw man to say integrated deterrence would somehow be divorced from a comprehensive integrated approach that relies on military power. I would be equally with you, Representative, if that's somehow decoded as a stovepipe device comprehensive approach. And to your point, is it successful or not? The context of the U.S. Approach here would be in defense of the NATO allies. And so I believe we'll see how that turns out.
Thank you, Admiral. Yep. Chair now recognizes Congresswoman Luria.
Yes, I was going to shift back, Admiral Lescher, to some things that you mentioned in your statement. So I'll just quote what you wrote. You said, "Too often, from an institutional perspective, we have viewed poor performance as one-off failures, made short-term adjustments, and focused on administrative solutions, adding burdensome regulations and guidance over developing our people," end quote. But then you go on to talk about all the administrative solutions and guidance that you've put in place to fix this problem, such as Get Real, Get Better, Learning to Action Board, Safety Management System, Performance to Plan, Navy Sustainment System, additional fire safety inspections and requirements, more requirements for training officers, and the list is pretty long. So just looking at the Bonhomme Richard as an example, and you've talked about different causes for these types of incidents, would you say that that was cultural? Was it training? Was it programmatic? Can you describe where you think that fit?
My fundamental diagnosis of Bonhomme Richard was remarkable organizational drift and an insufficiently intrusive ISIC. That's a bad combination. So the question that then emerges is why? What drove that? I believe our site picture on we hadn't properly trained our individuals going into these maintenance depots necessarily. So the damage control industrial certification being one remedy for that. It's a very fair question on whether we're not, by proliferating guidelines, regulations, instructions as our primary method of learning, that's not oversubscribing the ability of our triads and our people to process them. There's a really interesting learning example in naval reactors, which you might say is the exemplar of that culture. And they are in a strong push to step back from 100-page instructions and really start making that knowledge come alive with a principles-based approach. What are the 8 principles of radiological?
Perhaps in the time we have is limited, so I would love to follow up and learn more about, how they're evolving that, and perhaps learn from Admiral Caldwell as well. So none of the things that we talked about, specifically within this statement and the problems within the surface fleet involve warfighting. They involve basic routine navigation, for example, and import maintenance operations. But if you look at warfighting, for example, and I asked Admiral Aquilino this question a few years ago in a similar hearing when he was still the commander of Pacific Fleet, just want to know where you assess and are we taking appropriate and equal actions to evaluate our proficiency in the warfighting realm?
Yeah, I think there's very strong, particularly in the surface community, very strong progress on warfighting. If you want to amplify a bit, Roy.
Yes, ma'am. I think one of what we've done is we're trying to emulate what we did with developing our maritime skills continuum. We did a really good job of, after the collisions, and saying, okay, here's what we need to be, how we need to be proficient, and here's how we get there and what we need to measure. We've taken the same approach to tactical proficiency, and we've sort of turned our witties loose at our Surface and Mine Warfare Development Center to come up with this program. The initial results are we've gone in and we're looking and measuring through a series of tests where our students are coming out of, say, department head school or some of our milestone schools. And then we have a methodology for evaluating them during exercises and building that expertise, getting them into those trainers and then integrating them. But I think what's essential to it has been the ability to measure it so that now we can actually get them into a trainer, understand where their deficiencies are and correct those. And so it's something that we've embarked on over the last year and utilizing those trainers we developed and collecting that data, and that's the trajectory we're on. And I'd be happy to talk to you about it further.
Sure, and you talked about, this is for ship handling, these go, no-go checkpoints. So some data I would like to know is, how many officers have been through these checkpoints, how many have been a no-go, specifically how many prospective commanding officers have been no-goes and not passed that milestone in order to go to command. And moreover, this kind of ties back into my question about warfighting, is why is the surface fleet not doing something similar to the submarine commander's course, where all of these elements are evaluated before someone can actually take command?
I think that is the journey that we were on. I think that is eventually what we want to do. We want to get to a tactical course, a capstone course that they go through, that they do before command. To answer your question directly on the number of COs that have been through, I'll have to come back to you on that, but I believe the number is about 13 that have not been able to proceed on to command, that were no-go at their command assessment.
And for scale sake, at what percentage, or 13 out of several hundred, or?
It's probably, and I'd come back to you on that one because I don't want to speculate, but it's.
Okay, just kind of want to understanding the scope. But I mean, it is good to hear that it is actually a checkpoint and that the people who are not meeting that are actually not progressing on.
And that's at both the command level and at the major command level.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Great, thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Admirals, you've touched the nerve in several of us. I was sitting up in my office. I'm a pretty fast writer, sometimes not legible, but I was writing as fast as I could when the acronyms and the buzzwords started to flow, Admiral Lescher. L2AB, okay? Simplify, streamline, and design. Get real, get better. Perform to plan. Self-assessing, self-correcting. not sure what year you got your wings, but did Benny Suggs and Any Mouse exist? As a naval aviator, we used to have, and this was not just to the aviation units, but Any Mouse, which was acronym for Anonymous at the time. You had your little box in the squadron ready room or in the maintenance spaces where you could actually, anybody, whether you were that newest sailor or Marine in that unit or that, you know, someone below the CO and the XO and the NATOPS and the safety, can sit there and get real-time feedback from those under your command about just, hey, Anonymous, this is what's going on. Benny Suggs, beneficial suggestions. You know, those were two very simple feedback loops that were used 50-plus years ago. I don't know if they worked. I do know that as a former NATOPS and safety officer at the squadron level, that the only thing I feared is if I ever had a perfect flight, I would never, ever get into an aircraft ever again, because that would mean the next one was going to be a real bear. All right? So the point is, and again, I'm not to dwell on aviation here, but I think it's a comparative example that we continue to learn from. There was a time in naval aviation that aviators didn't really fear a sim ride. It's just another, you know, I'll take my chances in the aircraft itself. Well, as a commercial airline pilot, if we didn't pass our check ride, we didn't have a paycheck or a job. So that culture, I believe, has changed over the last few decades because of what we can do in simulators for all of our, you know, all of our servicemen and women, regardless of your, you know, regardless of your service. I guess what concerns me is that we, at the higher levels, have spent too much time playing with words rather than challenging people, our young folks who come into our services at this day and age, come in with maybe different skill sets, different levels of maturity, because an 18-year-old in our country today, according to the data that's out there by some very good social scientists, the average 18-year-old in our country today is performing emotionally at about 16 and a half to 17. So think about that when those young recruits enter boot camp at Great Lakes. By the way, the Navy, and thanks to Vern Clark for what he did in his vision of that new basic training center up at Great Lakes. I was a guest there a long time ago and had a chance to tour it because you're getting in the minds and the heads of those young trainees. I was even impressed with the Dr. Scholl's little machine you stood on there to see if your shoes, your boots were going to fit right. You know, as Marines, that never really happened. You know, you were lucky to have, you know, things that didn't leak or didn't create fungus on your feet, but that's a different story. But you have done so much, but we're not there. We are not there, and we need to be there, and we need to stop with the acronyms to a point, get back to things like Any Mouse or Benny's, whatever we're going to call it, create a feedback loop that gives it to you immediately, and I'm going to give you one acronym that if you want to use it, great. We've all heard about tough love, right? You get nothing done out of hate. It's all out of love. So in this case, the tough, and as a Marine, I'm spelling challenged, so I'm just going to say TUF, and that's train until failure. Because if you fail in your training, you learn. And with that, I yield back, and I thank you for never quitting on those sailors, Marines, and civilians under your command. And set the expectations high, and don't try to BS this group, because we're here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. Chair now recognizes Ms. Jacobs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Admiral Lescher, a lot of my colleagues have already brought up the findings of the recent GAO report, but I want to focus on one specific issue that I believe deserves extra focus. GAO found that the surface fleet is 15% undermanned compared to required levels. Since undermanning was part of the reason for the Fitzgerald and McCain disasters, Why has more not been done to fix this in the last 5 years? What is the Navy doing to increase manning, and when will surface ships be fully manned with the proper fit?
Thanks for that question. A couple of dimensions on which to answer it. I talked about the remarkable growth in end strength in the Navy since the 2017 and the GAO report. So very much getting after it. And part of the reason that it remains undermanned is because we've been adding billets as well. So as we've added, the end strength of the Navy's grown 23,000, as we talked about, since 2017. As we add billets to address the overwork issue and make sure the crew is sized for everything that's expected on that ship, we're then chasing that with our accessions. So we're closing the gaps across the Navy. The other element is we have very strong certification and focus on what the manpower, the manning that we deploy our ships with. And so the remaining work for us to get after with a strong sense of urgency is across the full OFRP cycle as well. There's an element, and I see that Ranking Member Waltz has left, where he was talking about, hey, where is data being used by Navy? And I'd like Admiral Kitchener to talk about the surface maintenance experience point, which shows another way, ma'am, which the Navy is bringing a sense of urgency to not only bring in more sailors, to get the proper requirements level on the destroyers, but also to allocate that scarce resource in the most data-driven, powerful way. And Roy, if you'd care to talk about that.
Yes, sir. And so what we found as we man our ships to the 92, 95 fit fill was that we weren't necessarily getting the right combination of people. I talked a little bit about it earlier with the apprentice journeyman supervisor thing. So I did not have a vote on where to send certain people. And so we stood up a SurfMex. We looked at the aviation model where they look at tracking expertise and proficiency. So we did it with 6 rates in the Navy. Most of it was in engineering and some warfighting rates as well. And what we do now is we track each individual and what their proficiency and experience is, and then we are able to put them where we think we need them. For example, if a ship is down in a number of years of experience in an engineering work center or an Aegis fire control system, we can actually make sure we send the right person there that increases the proficiency. It's a much better measure of fit. We've been doing it for a year now. Right now, it's part of the manning process, but we're using it extensively to sort of fill those gaps at sea that we talked about, making sure we have the right people to go there. So very encouraging results to date, and I think it's a metric that we're going to continue to go after and allow us to make sure we have that manning right on the ship.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate that, especially because we had a hearing on the effectiveness of suicide prevention programs yesterday, and it was extremely disheartening to hear reports that ships' crew members reported that they have lost at least one service member to suicide and dozens of others due to mental health issues over a 7-month period. And so I really hope that you're working on, addressing the unsafe conditions and the safety measures and the hours and leave and all of that, so that we are addressing that issue. In my last minute, I also wanted to ask that the GAO has also found that the Navy is not enforcing its fatigue policies in the surface fleet, with most sailors receiving 5 hours or less of sleep. Why has the Navy failed to fix this, and what are you doing to ensure sailors receive the required amount of sleep?
About a year ago, we finally came up in the Surface Navy with a pretty rigorous policy for what we want to do for fatigue management. We set our goal as 7.5 hours of sleep a night. Today, I can tell you we get to about 6 hours. So clearly, some more work to be done. We're teamed up with the National Health Center, ONR, the Naval Postgraduate School, a bunch of other groups, some of the fitness experts that we work with, measuring giving people wearables on ships so we can measure how much time, so we actually have the data to understand it. We've introduced some watch station tools, and we've also so a CO can manage his people as he tracks their fatigue. So I'm encouraged, but we still have a lot of work to do, and I could talk about it at another time on how we monitor how well we're doing at it. Over.
Well, thank you so much. As a representative of San Diego, these issues are deeply personal to me and my constituents. So I will continue pushing you to do better for our surface warfare officers. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, and thank you for those questions, Ms. Jacobs. Next up is Mr. Moore. Is he still on WebEx? There he is. Hey, Blake.
Yeah, I'm on WebEx. I'm here. Thank you. You hear me okay?
Hear you fine.
Great. I'm a little distracted today. I wanted to personally apologize to both of you, to Admiral and Vice Admiral. If the House of Representatives failed the military and veteran community today, there's a bill about toxic burn pits that passed unanimously out of the Senate, and Speaker Pelosi puts a different bill that she knows Republicans won't broadly support. We've delayed this for too long. There are numerous Republicans that have been very supportive. I've co-sponsored legislation on this. This was just one of the most frustrating things that I've seen in my time here related to our veteran community, and I wanted to just personally apologize to you and take that few moments to do. I'm not trying to be political about this. I've shared my thoughts with other members. We owe it to our veterans to not play partisan political games with your lives. If we truly care about toxic burn pits, we would have passed and put on the floor the version that passed unanimously in the Senate. There is no way around that. That is a sheer partisan game, and it's the most frustrating thing that I've seen. But going with the topic at hand, there's been a lot that's been highlighted about the detrimental and toxic impacts of insufficient manning, inadequate training, and low morale. I applaud the Navy for having the foresight and humility to take an introspective look at how we can do better to avoid these tragic accidents. The reforms discussed today will certainly save lives, and from your testimonies, and improve lethality and effectiveness of our surface Navy. As co-chair of the Depot Caucus, I would like to use my time to discuss the degraded material condition, delayed maintenance, and expired training certificates of our forward deployed ships. Again, depot work is very important to my district and to many across the country, and vital for our readiness. I pose these questions to both of you gentlemen. Either of you or one of you wants to respond. Investigation into these incidents revealed that fleet leadership often properly reported on material deficiencies, only to be ignored or relieved. Were these reports ignored due in part to deficiencies or lack of capacity at our shipyards and the Navy Organic Industrial Base? Can you shed a little light on that?
Sir, I'm unfamiliar with the details of what you described. Is there a source, or can you help me understand better?
I don't have any particular source on it right now, and I'm happy to submit something more specific, more substantive via written, if that's if you'd prefer.
That'd be helpful. I will say, again, we've been swarming, I would say, very intensely the depot maintenance issues since 2018 in particular to look at this. In the private shipyards, Admiral Kitchener leads the effort to perform the plan to drive improvements there, and it's focused on being very radically transparent about what we see. Again, it was the genesis, the kernel of what it means to get real. Public shipyards as well, my view, we're approaching an inflection point in the performance of the public shipyards. And so I'll be eager to see and address the issues that you highlight.
And even if we just make it about delayed maintenance, has delayed maintenance, just in general, without any specifics, played a role in these training mishaps? Would you be able to pinpoint any examples there?
I can talk about it. I think in the past, what we found, particularly in the forward deployed naval force, was that we did not have a good record of doing our continuous maintenance. As we came out of that incident, we've corrected that. And so now all the maintenance gets done. We still struggle a little bit in one of the ports out there because of in Sasebo, because of a capacity issue. But overall, in general, we are not deferring maintenance. And if we do defer any kind of maintenance on a ship, it is done at the highest level. That decision is made. But that perhaps is what you're referring to. In the past, there was an issue, particularly in the forward deployed naval force.
The one thing I might add very quickly, sir, is, and it gets back to the earlier comment about the impact of a CR, we will be deferring maintenance non-trivially if I'm just looking at the numbers in terms of a continuing resolution for the balance of this year.
I appreciate your comments on the continuing resolution. Again, another example of my apologies to you about how ineffective and decrepit our House of Representatives is, and we're playing games with partisan games and not providing our military what they need. It's a frustrating thing. So I have a whole nother question on being fully funded. I am out of time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Admiral Kitchener, I'm sure you're familiar with the retired Vice Admiral Belisle's 2010 report on the health of the service Navy. The report was pretty scathing, in which I read the Navy's declining service readiness. This committee has conducted several investigations since his report and still has grave concerns facing the fleet. In the simplest of terms, I don't have a military background, and I'm a layman. So if you could explain to me in layman's terms, and really the American people, in layman's terms, we had 4 accidents in 2017, where, if my data is correct, 3 collisions and 1 ran aground. 1 ship ran aground, which seems crazy to me with how big the ocean is, and I mean, to have 3 accidents, 3 ships hit each other, they're pretty big vessels. It's not like you can't see them. So if you can explain to me in layman's terms without, and I would echo Mr. Bergman's, I don't know all the acronyms, just in layman's terms, how does that happen? I'm sorry, is it a training? Is it a equipment? Is it just in the simplest terms?
When we looked at those incidents that you referred to, ma'am, we kind of focused on two specific areas. One was on the training, which you brought up, and we found that at the time, a surface junior officer, one of our newest people coming to control the ship, drive the ship, their training was, we weren't giving them enough time. We weren't giving them enough time in simulators, giving them the fundamentals. So we focused on the training, and we developed a continuum that now, back then.
Has that been corrected then?
Yes. And so when an ensign reported aboard a ship back in 2017, they got about 150 hours in a simulator, which we just had a discussion on.
Yep.
Today, they get 750 hours of training. And so that was one of the areas we approached. Another one was we looked at maintenance, which we just had a discussion on. And in the forward deployed naval force at the time, we weren't doing all of our continuous maintenance. And so
and we weren't doing it, why?
We weren't doing it because of the ships were required to be operational. There wasn't that balance we have now where we have a tension between the operational team and the maintenance.
There was no slack in the system. They had to be deployed.
There was a demand signal for ships to be operational. And so what we did is we went back and we looked at that and we corrected the maintenance that we did. And at the same time, we looked at, are they certified to do the missions? Are we taking these people that are trained, putting them on ships and putting them in a situation that they are not trained for? We corrected that. So now all the certifications are completed before we send a ship out on a mission. And that's and I described it a little bit earlier as the type commander, the individual responsible for man training and equipping those ships. I have a good, healthy tension with that fleet commander out there who wants to use them for operations. And if they're not ready, then we have a discussion. And if we can't agree to it, and then it's resolved at the 4-star command level.
So, and again, forgive my newness.
That's okay.
But when you say we have a discussion, if they're not ready, I'll assume if they're not ready, we're not going to deploy them.
They do not go.
Okay. Thank you, sir. With that, I'll yield my time back.
Thank you, Ms. McLean. Thank you for asking that question, because that was sort of the debate after McCain and Fitzgerald about whether we should put a safety brake on the system, which is Admiral Richardson, who was CNO at the time, described. And again, I think, that really is one of the real accomplishments. Still not, we're not in perfect yet, but, that helped, right? Yeah. Great. Great, thank you. Congresswoman Lurie had requested about a minute and a half or so just for another follow-up question. Chair recognizes Ms. Lurie.
Well, thank you for the additional time. And I just wanted to follow up to my previous question, and it was really about the effectiveness of our warfighting. So you've done a good job today, and I've had separate conversations with Admiral Lescher many times about how you're improving in the basic things. And you have metrics for that. And you can say it for the ship driving, for navigation. You can show it in things with maintenance where you've done a very analytical basis. But I mean, the bottom line is, what do we have to show that we're ready? And we're ready to fight a peer competitor as far as our warfighting skills and capabilities. So that is really, where my question lies. And we can follow up, and I would love to learn more in-depth information about, how you're measuring that. I think that is the next step and the most important step as we face what we're facing in the Pacific. But the next thing is language. Reading your statements, hearing you speak, you seem to choose your words very carefully, but they don't really sound like, normal people in the Navy speak. They don't sound like, the normal public would listen to. And even, some of the things that have been put out, by the Navy and various commands within the Navy on social media that are trying to reach the broader public to explain, the purpose of your mission and why we have a Navy and why these investments are so important and really have never been more critical. So I just urge you a lot, like my colleague maybe did in all forums, to just look at the language you're using and make sure it's clear and concise and to the point. Like, you're getting a message out there. You want the public to know that a Navy is absolutely essential to our national defense, and especially in the environment that we're in today. So I think that would be helpful, not only in coming to us to let us as Congress know why you're asking for the things you're asking in the budget, for the broader public to know why it's a good investment of their tax dollars. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Garamendi for final comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The comments very, very quick. Today's testimony, questions, and the answers lead me to believe that the Navy is in the process of addressing the manifold problems that have been highlighted in this hearing. I look forward to seeing the specific plan, the integration of the 4 different elements that you've described, and then also how you intend to drive those activities down onto each and every ship, and then how to monitor the success of that. I look forward to that. We'll be following up. And my final point is, if it takes direction, money beyond the current little problem of the continuing resolution, we need to know. With that, I yield back and thank the witnesses. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to both my colleagues. Again, and to the witnesses. We covered actually a broader range today, but obviously with events going on, that's not unexpected. Obviously, we'll be seeing you soon, I'm sure, once we get the President's budget and posture hearings. Thank you again for, again, the follow-up from our classified briefing and today's public hearing. And with that, the hearing is adjourned.